for a number of families. Would you turn in your Bible to Acts chapter 24? Crime shows and courtroom dramas sure make for good entertainment. Reality cop shows like Cops or Live PD are two of the popular ones. And crime shows, can you believe how many crime shows are on television? Criminal Minds has been on for 15 seasons, 324 episodes. NCIS has been on 17 seasons and counting. As a boy, I spent way too much time watching Malloy and Reed patrol in the Adam 12 cruiser around Los Angeles, and watching McGarrett and Dano bust a lot of people over there in Hawaii. Those who have a few years on me are already thinking about the courtroom drama that you watched in black and white. And that was Perry Mason. I don't know anything about Perry Mason, but some of you a little bit ahead of me. Perry Mason, Raymond Burr was the courtroom star of that. 271 episodes of Perry Mason. So maybe you've been flipping around and you've seen him. There's a new genre started in the last couple of decades, like live courtroom dramas. The People's Court. Anybody remember Judge Wapner from about 30 years ago? And the thing about Judge Wapner, that was the first binding public courtroom in the country, where if you signed up to go on the show, you had to agree with whatever Judge Wapner decided. And it's gone through several iterations and popular different judges, Judge Marilyn, Judge Brown, Judge Mathis, Judge Judy. I don't know, you've watched them all. Wonder what your favorite cop show is, courtroom drama. I don't know. If you had any interest in any of these kinds of programs, you would like the book of Acts. The fifth book of the New Testament. It's the history of the early church, and it's full of courtroom drama. By my count, there's at least 8 courtroom settings where a believer gets called in on the carpet and has to defend or explain their faith in a hostile environment. You're in Acts 24. That's where we're going today. That's another one of these courtroom dramas, and it's Paul who has to explain and defend himself in that environment. He's been arrested, and he was arrested in Jerusalem at the temple, and he was then transported 60 miles north to Caesarea Philippi, actually the city that was just on the video there. And at Caesarea, he was kept in Herod's Praetorium. Herod built a palace right on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. You could travel there today and see the ruins of Herod's palace that was there. And it was a fortress palace, and it also included a prison. And that's where Paul was kept. And when we pick up the story in Acts 24, in fact, the last words of verse 23 tell us that he was kept at Herod's Praetorium. Now, the topic today is dealing with critics. Getting hauled into court and facing accusations would be an extreme version of criticism. Paul faces something far more aggressive than mere criticism. And how he handles it gives us great learning and wisdom for life and for dealing with our own critics. And before we're done, we'll look at the ultimate example of Jesus and how he dealt with his critics. So I want to read the first 4 verses, and we'll open the case file here and see what happens. Verse 1. Now after 5 days, Ananias the high priest came down with the elders and a certain orator named Tertullus. They gave evidence to the governor against Paul. And when he was called upon, Tertullus began his accusation, saying, "Seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity is being brought to this nation by your foresight. We accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Nevertheless, not to be tedious to you any further, I beg you to hear by your courtesy a few words from us." We'll stop right there, and 4 people are introduced to us, or 3 people in a group, to help set the stage in this case file. The first is Ananias, and he's the high priest in Jerusalem of the Jewish faith. In the book of Acts, there's 3 different people named Ananias, And this would be one of those. This was a very corrupt, very evil, actually, high priest. It's hard to fathom, but the Jews had this leader that was very corrupt. And the elders who were there, that's the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council. And it says they went down to Caesarea because in Jewish writings, Jerusalem was on a hill, and everywhere they went was down from Jerusalem. And so it gives that little geographical accuracy and cultural reference there. The third person in our account is the governor, and his name is Felix. This Felix, the governor, is in the same position as Pontius Pilate was 25 years earlier when Jesus stood before him. From AD 6 until AD 66, that 60-year span, the Roman government placed into leadership or governorship of Judea 14 different individuals. And they were in that position for a number of different years. Pilate was in that position for 10 years. Felix that we're looking at. Pilate was number 5 in the list of 14. Felix was number 10. And we're going to see before we get done today, we'll meet another one, Festus, and he's number 11, the next one. Now this Felix was a freed slave who had worked his way up, not by the quality of his work, but by his family connections. He was appointed to this position not because he was good at it, but because he was connected. Anybody work with anybody like that? You know somebody that got appointed to that position because they knew somebody, not because they were good at it. Here's some historical descriptions of Felix in this role. He thought he could do any evil with impunity. He's totally lacking in understanding of sympathy for the Jews. He led with all manner of lust and cruelty. So Paul's in this environment where Ananias, the high priest, is the most cruel and corrupt high priest they've known. He's standing before a judge that hates Jews. And there's a lawyer that's going to present the prosecution case against Paul. His name is Tertullus. And if you think about Tertullus, I want you to think about a mob lawyer. Think about a guy that's on the payroll of the mob, and his whole role is to help get the mob crooks off. That's kind of Tertullus's role here. And look how he starts in verse 2. He begins his presentation. He's in front of Felix. And when he was called upon, Tertullus began his accusation, saying, "Seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity that's brought by you to this nation with your foresight." Do you get what's going on here? This Felix is a horrible man that all the Jewish people hate. They can't stand him because of his cruelty. There's no historical record of any actual accomplishments that he did in his 8 years. There's no waterways. There's no fortresses that were built. There's no food supply that increased. There's no roads that were built. There's no armies that were raised to protect people. But Tertullus says, we're living in such prosperous times. And we owe it all to you, Tertullus. Thank you so much. How could we ever say enough? And then, in fact, look at verse 4. Nevertheless, at the end of 3, he says, we're doing all this with such gratitude. We're all just living with gratitude to you. There's a lot of verses in Proverbs about flattery and such. We're watching flattery in action. Verse 4, nevertheless, not to be tedious to you any further, I beg you to hear by your courtesy. He's like, I have so many more things to say. I can't possibly tell you anymore. Many years ago, I was in high school, and we took a ministry trip to another church. And they served us some sloppy joes. I remember this. I was in 10th grade or something. And the sloppy joes were horrible. And nobody was eating them. And we found an open window. And we were dropping them out the window, honestly. And so people were going back for more. And they were going through sloppy joe material and such. So our youth pastor then got up to speak, and we had a little program that I was a part of, but he got that we all were part of. And he got up to speak, and he's like, hey, I just want to thank everybody for, making us feel welcome. And the Sloppy Joes, I can't tell you how many Sloppy Joes I had to eat tonight. Because the answer was 0. But they didn't know that. He said, I can't tell you how many I had. So that's exactly what Tertullus is doing here. He says to Felix, I can't tell you all the great things you've done for the Jewish people. Because there weren't any to tell him about. So verse 5, we begin, here's the accusation. Verse 5, we have found this man, this is Paul now, who was arrested at the temple. He worships God. We have found this man a plague, a creator of dissension among the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and we seized him and wanted to judge him according to our law. They make 3 accusations here. They accuse him of breaking Roman law. They accuse him of breaking Jewish law. They accuse him of breaking God's law. They just are trying to cover the gamut here with Tertullus. He says he's trying to break Roman law because he's traveling all over spreading discord in the Roman Empire. He's a troublemaker. He's a plague. He's a disease. He's a cancer. He's spreading insurrection all over the empire. And then they accuse him of being the ringleader of the Nazarenes. Jesus from Nazareth. Early Christians were called Nazarenes as a term of derision for them, following Jesus of Nazareth. You might remember back, it was a future disciple that Jesus found, and he said, I saw you under a tree, Nathanael. And Nathanael learned Jesus was from Nazareth. He said, can any good thing come from Nazareth? It was kind of considered the other side of the tracks. It wasn't sophisticated. If somebody's going to follow Christ, they have to come to terms with the fact that our belief system isn't among the sophisticated. It's not from Jerusalem. It's not from Rome. It's from Nazareth. That backwater, backwoods, the hillbillies are there in Nazareth. That's how people are thinking, and that's what they're getting at. He's the ringleader of these Nazarenes. And if somebody needs to be cool and accepted and popular, it's going to be hard to walk with Christ and pursue popularity at the same time, because a walk with Christ is a walk with the man from Nazareth, not the one from Jerusalem. So they accuse him of the Nazarenes, and then they also say that he's desecrated the temple, he's profaning the temple, he's breaking the laws of God too. Can you believe that? Now the principle right off the bat, kind of an early application here, is this. Effective ministry and criticism go hand in hand. Effective ministry and criticism will go hand in hand. When you're aware of a ministry that's making progress for God and they're advancing the cause of the gospel, there will be criticism. Let's not be surprised about that. Let's not be shocked by that. That shouldn't cause us to slow down or back off. Last week we talked about how truth creates conflict. Just by virtue of living truthfully and proclaiming the truthful message of Christ, there will be conflict. There will be disagreement. When you're doing anything worthwhile, there will be criticism. In 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 9, Paul is trying to explain to the people at Corinth this idea. A great and effective door of opportunity has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. Here's this great opportunity, and here's the challenges. But the challenges don't measure up to the opportunities that are ahead. Now, this also applies to an individual that's trying to get out of the crab bucket, if you will, of life. It's said that if you put a number of crabs in a bucket, one of them will try to get out, but all the other crabs in the bucket are going to grab them and reach for them and try to pull them back into the bucket. And then another one tries to get out of the crab bucket and crawls up, and all the rest of the crabs are going to reach up and try to pull them back. And some of you have begun to pursue God and to live righteously. And all the other crabs that are in the bucket that where you used to live are saying, it's not going to last. That's not who you are. Why don't you come back here with us where you belong? Why don't you come join the rest of us where you belong? You'll be back. It's not going to last. Criticism always comes from people that don't know what they're talking about, people that aren't doing anything, people that don't know anything. Sometimes criticism just comes from people that are ornery and they're just trying to get at you. In fact, when you hear criticism, it's often helpful to look at it and say, is this a person that criticizes often, or is this a new thing? Because there's been times in my life when I've started to realize, hey, and I've even said, hey, you're against this, this, and this. So I'm having trouble believing that number 4 is the real issue, because you've complained about the last 3 things. On the other hand, when somebody comes and that's not their nature and they have something to say, it might be good to listen. Our Lord was nailed to a cross, so we can count on being nailed to the wall, somebody one time said. So I want to look as Paul begins to explain himself. How does he handle the critics? 7 ways Paul handled criticism. And so let's take a look in verse 10. Then Paul, after the governor had nodded to him to speak, he answered, inasmuch as I know that you have been for many years a judge of this nation, I do more cheerfully answer for myself. First thing Paul did is he did not get caught up in the emotion of the charges. He didn't get sucked into the emotion. Because these accusations were outlandish. He's violating Jewish law. He's violating Roman law. He's violating God's law. These are outlandish accusations. And when we get accused, we want to lash out in anger. We want to lash back at them. Yeah, but you do this. Yeah, but you're inconsistent. Yes, but. And we want to react. We want to freak out. We want to get angry back. And now the tension escalates, because when we respond to anger with anger, and then that responds with anger, and that responds with anger. And Paul stayed calm, and he said, I'm just glad for a chance to explain myself to you. I'm glad for us to have a little hearing here. In Proverbs 15 and verse 1, it says, a soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. You see, you hold in your hands the issue of whether that becomes an argument or not. You hold in your hands whether it escalates or not. Just because somebody speaks harshly to you, just because somebody criticizes you, that doesn't mean that it becomes an argument. You hold it in your hands to determine step 2. And Paul did not get caught up. He didn't escalate the situation. Instead, he stayed with the facts. He stayed with the facts. Verse 11. Because you may ascertain, this is Paul's answer back to the judge, because you may ascertain that it's no more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship. They neither found me in the temple disputing with anyone, nor inciting the crowd, either in the synagogues or the city, nor can they prove the things of which they now accuse me. He said, it's only been 12 days. All the witnesses are fresh. I wasn't stirring anything up at the temple. I was there to worship. He didn't get emotional. He gave just the facts, ma'am, as another old-time police show used to say. And he told the truth with a clear conscience. Verse 14. But this I confess to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, so I worship the God of my fathers. Believing all things which are written in the law and the prophets, I have hope in God, which they themselves also accept, and there will be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. This being so, I always strive to have a good conscience without offense toward God and men. He told the truth. Now, I was thinking about this. He could have easily said, hey, I went to the temple to worship and stopped there. But he went and he would have been truthful to say that. Have you ever been truthful but you didn't? What do they say when you put your hand? Do you promise to tell the truth? And then what's the next phrase? The whole truth. And then nothing but the truth. What Paul did in verse 12 and 12 was tell the truth. What he did in 14 and 15 was the whole truth. Now, we often don't tell the truth because we're trying to get out of trouble. We're trying to avoid some controversy. We're trying to make ourselves look good so we don't tell the whole truth. But he gets there and he says, here's what I believe. I've got to confess this. I believe in the faith of my fathers as it comes from the law and the prophets. And then he went to the resurrection. How fascinating that he went to the resurrection, both of the just and the unjust. He made sure to include the most important aspect of the Christian faith, the resurrection. I also thought his common ground effort was fascinating. In verse 15, he said, I have hope in God, which they themselves also accept. My beliefs, there's some common ground that we have between ourselves. They believe some of the same things I believe. And then, of course, in verse 16, the good conscience. I myself always strive to have a good conscience. And that speaks to heart motives as well as actions. Imagine for a moment, we're talking about truthfulness. Imagine for a moment if your conversations that you had were recorded and then played back. Imagine if your conversations were recorded and then played back for the people you were talking about. Imagine if they were recorded and then turned into the police. Imagine if your conversations were recorded. And others would they hear consistency? Would they hear the truth, the partial truth, and slightly only the truth? You see, when you tell the truth, you don't ever have to worry about that recording getting played. And you don't ever have to worry about who hears the recording because you told the truth. Another interesting thing about Paul and how he handled critics is he identified the source of the conflict, the source of the criticism. Verse 17. Now, after many years, I came to bring alms and offerings to my nation, in the midst of which some Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with a mob nor with tumult. They ought to have been here before you to object if they had anything against me. Let me pause for a moment. See, in verse 17 it says, now after many years. What's Paul been doing for many years? Traveling all over the region, starting churches, winning people to Christ and discipling leaders. Then he says, after many years, I wanted to go to Jerusalem to worship. And I got there to worship. I wasn't creating a scene. I wasn't raising tumult. Who came to harass him? It's in verse 18. Some Jews from Asia found me there. Asia is modern-day Turkey. Who were these people that found him? Remember, about every one of Paul's missionary stops, there's a group of people that follow him there and harass him, that stir up the mobs against him. They're the little dogs nipping at his heels everywhere he goes. Do you know they followed him to Jerusalem from modern-day Turkey? This is hundreds of miles. Probably getting on a boat. If it was on foot, it was even longer. And they follow him to Jerusalem. Give it a rest. Give it a rest. This poor guy that bakes cakes in Colorado that just wants to bake cakes in peace and bake cakes according to his moral values. You know, he just got sued again a couple weeks ago. He won a case at the U.S. Supreme Court, and 3 or 4 weeks ago, another lawsuit was brought against him. Why? There's not other people that could bake cakes? Absolutely there is. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it's like this group of people that travels hundreds of miles to find Paul and bring accusation against him that's not true. And so Paul says, where are my accusers? Because nobody saw me creating conflict. If my accusers really have a case against me, then they'd be here right now making that case. He's really saying it's impossible to answer somebody that's not here giving me the accusation face to face. I was very young in ministry when this one lady kept coming to me as a youth pastor. Joe, people are talking about this decision you made. People are talking about how you're running this thing. People are talking about... I started asking, why do people keep coming to you? And who are some of these people? Oh, no, I wouldn't say. Maybe it's just you. Maybe you're the one with the problem. How about if you and I talk and we don't hide behind these imaginary people? Some people are talking. Everyone's talking. And when we hear a criticism, that's how we start thinking. It's like, it's everybody. It's out there. Everybody knows. I remember years ago, somebody called me on the phone it was another pastor. He's like, hey, just want you to know, it's not true what they're saying about me. So I hadn't heard anything, but what are they saying? No, I didn't. We think everybody knows, and we think we got to defend ourselves. When really, if we could get to the source, it's really not that many people. And if the source isn't willing to have a conversation with you, then they aren't feeling that issue very deeply. And it may not be that second or third hand information. Well, Paul continues with this, and he doesn't surrender or quit. He says, I really want to talk to them. Verse 20. He said, or else let those who are here say that if they found any wrongdoing in me while I stood before the council, unless it is for this one statement which I cried out concerning the resurrection of the dead I'm being judged by. He's like, the only accusation I can think of would be if it's because I'm in favor of the resurrection. What could it be? If one critic causes you to quit, then you didn't feel very deeply in whatever it was you were doing. If one critic causes you to bail, then it didn't mean very much to you. That's all it took for you to quit? Was that? Now the time goes on, and Felix listened, and what Felix did, the governor, is he punted the ball. And he sends Paul, verse 23, he commanded the centurion to keep Paul, let him have liberty, but told him not to forbid. His friends were allowed to visit, but he was still confined. And then Felix brings his wife back to listen to Paul. Paul presents a message of the gospel, verse 25. And look at Felix's answer. I want to show you just the content of Paul's message and Felix's answer because it's haunting. Now, as Paul reasoned, such a great word, it's not emotional appeal. He reasoned about righteousness, his sins in the past that needed to be forgiven, about self-control, his present life, and the judgment to come. Paul's message addressed the past, the present, and the future, and how the gospel addresses all of those things. Felix the governor was afraid, and he says this. Listen to these haunting words. Go away for now. When I have a more convenient time, I will call you. Wow. I'll consider the gospel when I get around to it, when it fits in my schedule. How many people have an opportunity to cut right with God? And how many people don't because they're waiting for a more convenient time and it never comes? What a description of our culture and so many people in our day. The Bible could have been written yesterday. No, no thanks. You've witnessed to people. That might have been you for a while until some crisis caused you to wake up and say, I should probably recognize there's a creator of the universe to whom I'm accountable, because whatever I've been doing hasn't been working. Not till it's convenient. Right before I die, when I get him at the last minute. He doesn't surrender or quit. Go away until it's convenient. Two more things real quick just to fill in your notes there for the sake of time, because I want to get to how do we make critics our friends, and why would we? He doesn't become impatient or bitter. Look at verse 27. What's the first few words of verse 27 say? After 2 years, a new guy comes into office. 2 years. He's been sitting in this cell, innocent of the accusations. And a new person comes. That could be good news. Maybe I'll make some headway. It also could mean I got to start over. I have to go back to square one with the new guy. In chapter 25, the story goes on, and it's Paul dealing with Festus, the new one. And through it all, he hangs on to the promises of God. Back in chapter 23, God said to Paul, don't be afraid, Paul 23 and verse 11. He said, don't be afraid about things, Paul. You will represent me in Rome. You will travel to Rome to represent me. You're going to bear witness of me in Rome. So Paul's hanging on to that. So one season goes by, another month goes by, 6 months go by, a year goes by. 2 years. He gets called before Festus, the new governor. Number 11 in the series. If only we could get to the place where Romans 12 and verse 9 instructs us. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but give place to wrath. Put your anger aside, because it's written, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, I will repay. If only we could put it in God's hands, the search for justice, the search for righteousness. Because who's going to do a better, more fair job of getting revenge anyway? Or justice? 1 Peter 2 and verse 23, when Christ was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he didn't threaten, but he committed himself to him who judges righteously. And there's our ultimate example, Jesus Christ, and how he handled not just critics, but accusers that took him to the cross. So how do we make critics our friends? What if we could take criticism and turn it around for good? Whether they mean it for good or not, whether they mean it to be helpful or not, there's some benefits from criticism. One of them is that they help us prepare better. If you know going into a situation that there's going to be somebody critical of you in that situation, then you get over-prepared. Then you seek to answer questions. What will my worst critic say in this situation, in this presentation? I have to make it work. So-and-so is going to be there, and they're always critical of me, and they wish they'd have gotten the job, or they wish it was their presentation to make. How would I prepare as if they are in the room? Because they just might be. And so we over-prepare. We have all the information at our fingertips. We have all our facts down pat. We don't go in unprepared because they just might be there. And that makes them your friend because now you're prepared. Now you have all your ducks in a row. Now you have everything. Imagine if you prepared as if your worst critic was in the room. Another one. They might just provide you a nugget of truth. There just might be some truth there. So buried in the middle of all that, there could be something helpful, beneficial. If we could look past our defensiveness and look for that nugget of truth. Maybe there's a blind spot that you're missing. We all have blind spots. Not just when we're driving on the highway. We all have them. And your critic just might be helping you become more self-aware. A third benefit to having a critic, don't go out and search them out, by the way, but a third benefit, they help your determination to follow through. They help your resolution, your determination. And this one we drew from what we said earlier. If one critic causes you to abandon the cause, then you didn't believe very deeply in the cause. But if you hear a criticism and you say, I hear what they're saying, but I believe this so strongly, I'm going to do it. Critics help you see how deeply it runs into your body. They also, a fourth one, they help you examine your motives. They help you examine your motives. Am I being manipulative? Am I being judgmental? Am I being accusatory? Am I being selfish? They help you examine. Is there some selfishness in this? Another one, they help you see other viewpoints. It's maybe a shock to you that other people see things differently than you do. Well, what's wrong with them, right? That's what we're thinking right off the bat. You know, we could all use a little more empathy. If we could listen, the two ears, I heard Jocko say recently that one of your best leadership tools is your ears, to listen. So imagine if we heard from the critic and we asked some questions to help understand other viewpoints and where they're coming from. And one more, a critic pushes you to articulate your viewpoint more clearly. Maybe you say, and you're thrilled about the idea, and you're all excited, and you present the idea, and it gets shot down. But you still believe in the idea, so you go back to the drawing board, and you think, how do I articulate this idea better? How do I say it more clearly? How do I say it in ways they understand? Maybe it's my tone of voice. Maybe it's better wording. I've got to explain the why. Maybe I didn't give the why behind it. In Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. Maybe I didn't start with why and explain what was behind all of that. Proverbs 27 and verse 6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. Tertullus was an enemy kissing up to the governor. Would you rather have somebody flatter you or present a nugget of truth to give you another viewpoint for you to consider, to push you to articulate your viewpoint more clearly? Our ultimate example is Jesus Christ. Wrongly accused, publicly humiliated. But none of that deterred him from the cause. And he explained the cause. And then he followed through. And if we could come to that place where we could commit ourselves to him who judges righteously, if we could put our trust in the one who fully understands and is the righteous judge, then we would be on the path to wisdom and courage and strength. Would you stand with me, please? With your heads bowed and eyes closed. You've probably thought of a person or two, a circumstance or two where there's been some criticism. And what if you began to say, God, thank you for the opportunity to get my ducks in a row. Thank you for the opportunity, the challenge to articulate more clearly. Thank you for the chance I've had to understand other viewpoints. And thank you for Christ who left us such an example. God in heaven, I thank you for the example Jesus Christ left us. That even when he's insulted, even when he was suffering, He didn't respond in like manner. I pray that this week when criticism comes and we're put on the defensive, that we don't react with emotion. We look for the facts. We look for the nugget of truth. We respond at the level Christ did and from Paul's example here. In Jesus' name we pray.